Our next session is exploring the WMN-NET. Dr. Jorge Castillo is well known to most of us as the clinical director of the Bing Center for Waldenstroms in Boston, but you might not know that he was born in Peru and received his medical degree at the Metropolitan Autonomous University in Mexico City. He completed his internal medicine training at the University of Massachusetts and his hematology-oncology training at Brown University. Dr. Castillo is also an associate professor at Harvard Medical School. He's authored over 300 peer-reviewed articles and has published his research in many prestigious journals. Most recently, he is the founder and director of the WMNet, a think tank composed of academic researchers in the United States focused on designing and executing clinical research in patients with Waldenstroms. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Castillo.
Thank you very much. All right. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? You guys look great. You've been working out? Awesome. All right. So today I'm going to be accompanied by Leah. Where are you, Leah? Raise your hand. Oh, there you go. Perfect. Leah is Szumita. She's here with me, and this is going to be a shared presentation. Today, I will be talking to you about what has been going on with the WMNet. And it is kind of an update. You might not be aware of this, or maybe you might. There is also a concurrent WMNet meeting ongoing. We had a first session yesterday, and we'll have a second session today. And I'm just going to give you an update of what has been going on. We have a lot of different projects. And obviously, at the end, Leah will come over and she will help you understand how we navigate, these clinical trials, and that you might be, interested in participating. So this is the logo. I apologize for it. I came up with that. It's not that good, but that's the best I could do. WMNet. So the WMNet, and I think Meg made a note of that. It is a consortium that have put together a growing number of participating institutions across the United States. It's a United States-based organization. So the Canadians have their own network, and the Europeans have their own network. And the idea actually is that for all the networks to actually work together, there's another Australasian network that is also coming up. So, I think this is an important time, right, with momentum, in which there's people interested in multinational collaboration in different continents. The ideal goal would be at the end to create maybe an international consortium of Waldenstroms, and that's kind of semi in the works in that process. So this consortium has a specific mission, and is to improve the lives of patients with Waldenstroms through scientifically driven clinical research. Right, and I'll expand on that a bit later. And the vision of the network is to become a sustainable think tank that will support these clinical research efforts, specifically for patients with Waldenstrom. So these are our working mission and vision. And I say working because over time, more likely these things will change, and depending on how things move overall. So this network has been formally funded and founded about a year and a half ago. So this is how far we have been in existence. And there's some growing pains as expected, with things of this nature. But overall, I think it has been relatively fruitful. And I'm going to just show you the fruits of those efforts in the next 20 minutes or so. This is the map at the time of submission for this presentation. There are 2 additional sites, maybe 3, that will be in this map very soon. And as you can see, there is good representation of different institutions across the country, West Coast and East Coast and Midwest and South and all that. The participation is just driven by the interest of an individual within an institution. So we typically have one representative of each of these centers participating in the different meetings and the different emails, collaborations, and different projects as well. And the idea is that if a center feels that they can help with a specific project, then they will be part of that project. And I'll explain that in a second. And so not all the centers will participate in all the projects, and some centers will participate in some projects, and centers will participate in other projects. And I'll talk to you about that in a minute, but these are the institutions that are currently actively participating. If you feel that one of your centers is not here and they would like to have them, talk to your doctors locally. If they would like to contact me, and I'll be happy to start that conversation to see how big of an interest there is for collaboration. We're fully staffed. This presentation that I gave last year, we actually had only 2 members or 3 members of the network. Infrastructure, right now, we're actually fully staffed, and I'm the director, and we have a project manager who's not here, Courtney, she's on maternity leave. We have a research coordinator that is helping Courtney, make all the paperwork, go around to make sure that all the regulatory aspect of things and all the documentation and the protocols and the consent forms, everything is in place. We have a database manager, a research fellow, Alberto. Has been walking around the premises. He helped us with database, with data, gathering from different centers. And we have a biorepository coordinator. This is another project I will talk to you about in a second. That's Nick. And we have our meeting planner, who's Lorraine. So we are fully staffed as of now, and that is a good start from our perspective. So I think one of the first, the big reason this consortium got created is to be able to run clinical trials in a more concerted manner, all right? To make sure that a trial is not open only on one site, but rather maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different sites across the United States. And different centers will be opening different trials, as I mentioned earlier. So this is the first trial that was open under the umbrella of the network. And this is the loncastuximab tesirine for previously treated patients. That is the clinical trial ID. That's the NCT 05190705. Shayna, who was here a little earlier, she's the principal investigator for that study. And for this study specifically, we are working with Dr. Prashant Kapoor at the Mayo Clinic, as well as Mary Kwok from Fred Hutchinson. And this study is actively enrolling. And that 1424 means we have 14 patients, actually 15 patients as of yesterday, 14 at the time of submission. So 15 patients out of 24 patients in the study. So we are actually more than half enrolled, and that is very encouraging to see that participation from different centers. So just to give an idea of how the study works, and I think that's an important aspect, because I always get questions, so how does it work with clinical trials? So it really depends a lot on the design of each clinical trial. So some designs will not match some other designs, and has to do a lot with what the agent is, how is it given, how frequently is it given, the different type of assessments that we will do along the way during the trial. So really, if you're interested in a clinical trial, the first aspect is to actually get the consent form from the trial. It's a document. It's usually anywhere between 15 and 25 pages that will give you the actual design of the study, and that will get you an idea of the time commitment that will represent to you as a patient to become a participant on a clinical trial. So in this study specifically, loncastuximab tesirine is an agent that falls within a branch of research called immunotherapy. This is the first study ever with an agent of this nature in the world, right? And the network is running this. So this is an antibody. Pretty much everybody here has heard about rituximab, right? It's an antibody that we use. Rituximab is a naked antibody, and that means, the bag in which rituximab is diluted, it's injected into the patient's veins. The antibody finds the cancer cells, has a target against CD20, rituximab, finds the malignant cells, and that actually activates the cancer cell death, activates the immune system to kill the cancer cells more effectively. That's what typically naked antibodies do. This antibody, loncastuximab tesirine, is a second version, is a version 2.0 from that. It's a weaponized antibody. So is the antibody very similar to rituximab, but instead of targeting CD20, target CD19. So it's a different marker. Actually, CD19 is more widely expressed on Waldenstrom cells compared to CD20. CD20 is expressed in a good chunk of Waldenstrom cells, but CD19 just a little bit more, number one. And number two, this antibody will be injected in the patient's, infused in the patient's veins. It will find the cancer cell, as rituximab will do. But the difference is once it binds to the cancer cell membrane, because of the nature of the antibody, the cancer cell will actually absorb the antibody inside the cancer cell. And this is weaponized, this antibody is weaponized, has a linker to a payload. And that linker does not get activated unless the malignant cells absorbs the antibody. So it's totally inert. Once the cells absorbs the antibody, the linker gets dissolved, and the payload gets released. So there's not only the fact that you can activate the immune system and cause cancer cell death directly by the antibody function, there's a payload that gets delivered into the cancer cell in addition to that. So it's an immunotherapy. We call it antibody-drug conjugate, or ADC. It's a new mechanism of action. There's a lot of these now used in Hodgkin's lymphoma, in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, in aggressive lymphomas, in other solid tumors. There's a lot of ADCs, and this is the first ADC tried in patients with Waldenstrom. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time for you to understand how this is a cool mechanism of action, at least from my perspective. So this is the design of the study. So we typically get patients into Dana-Farber or the participating institution to undergo a screening visit. That screening visit is mandatory for the patients to be able to sign consent first. We cannot run any research activity unless the patient gives us consent, and that has to be signed. When the patients sign the consent, they acknowledge that they had enough time to read it, that they understand they're going into this, that they understand that they can stop participating at any time. I think that's a very important message to our patients. You know, the fact that you're in a trial doesn't mean that you need to stay in the trial even if you're not benefiting. If you think the trial is not for you, you're having too many side effects, you got bored of taking the pills, any reason at all, you can stop participating in a clinical trial at any time. And obviously, the ideal is that you will need to discuss that with the investigator, in this case me, right, to create a plan of how we're going to do that, right? But it's always, you know, it's a voluntary participation. It's not mandatory. So that's an important aspect. So you sign that consent form, and then most of the times patients get a physical examination by the physician, and then go to get some labs, blood counts, IgM levels. We need to understand the baseline of where the patients are. We typically get some CAT scans to see if there's any other enlargement of lymph nodes or organs or other problems. And the patients usually tend to have a bone marrow biopsy. And the reason we do all these type of testing is because not only we're trying to treat patients with a new treatment, we're trying to learn from that treatment so we can teach from that treatment. So the more complete data that we can have, the better off we are to be able to say, well, in these 25, 30, 50, 100 people, this is what we did, this is what we saw, this is how things happened, right? So complete data is very important for clinical trials. In this situation, once the patients sign the consent form and they undergo all this initial screening, and we feel that the patient is a good candidate for the study, the patient then comes back to begin treatment. In this specific study, each is an intravenous infusion. It takes about an hour to be infused, and we give it every 4 weeks and for 6 cycles. So that's the duration of the study. Very simple, very straightforward. At the end of the 6 cycles, then the patients come back for an end of treatment visit, in which they get to see us, they get to get some labs, repeat CAT scans if they were abnormal at the beginning, repeat a bone marrow biopsy to see what the effect has been, not only on hemoglobin and platelets or IgM, but also lymph nodes, spleen, bone marrow. We need to know everything. You know, we need to know if they're having new mutations that maybe appear, mutations have disappeared. So all this is very important information, so we can, again, teach the world how to do this if this study were to become successful. But that's not the end of it. So end of treatment doesn't mean end of study, right? Patients typically continue undergoing follow-up or monitoring of treatment for this study specifically. And in this situation, it's about 4-year follow-up. So 6 months of treatment, 4-year follow-up. And at the end of the 4 years, that becomes the end of study. And depending where the patients are at the moment, At that moment, it's usually a visit, labs, CAT scans, sometimes another bone marrow biopsy, sometimes it doesn't, depending on who the patient is or where the patient is at that moment. And then the patient comes out of the study back into regular clinical care, right? And that's just the way this kind of works. For this study specifically, we were aiming to see that at least 60% of the patients in the study will have at least a 25% decrease in their IgMs. That was, for us, in this type of patient who had already received rituximab-containing regimen, already received BTK inhibitors, so this is a heavily pretreated population, we wanted at least to induce a 60% response rate, and that was the goal of the treatment. So I want to present you or tell you what we have, our experience so far. So this is public data, that's why I can present it here to you. We have more updated data, but I cannot share that with you just yet. But this is the experience that we saw in the first 7 patients. This is data that we presented at the American Society of Hematology meeting in December of last year. Actually, Dr. Saroshek presented this data. And I think the important part of this is that we saw the response relatively quickly. Within 2 weeks, we actually were seeing already an IgM dropping in the patients who were part of this study. And as you can see there, the response rate exceeds the 60% that we were estimating into the 88%. So that's what we had at that moment. So the study so far has been doing very well. And it is a very heavily pretreated population because the median number of treatments the patients had was about 4, anywhere between 2 all the way to 6 lines of treatment previously. These are people who had chemos, rituximab, BTK inhibitors, right? And they have gone through all that, and they got into this type of treatment. MYD88 mutations were there in a majority of patients, as well as CXCR4, and there's this new mutation called TP53 that also patients seems to accumulate or kind of acquired during their lifetime, so we can see obviously a high proportion of those patients too. So we were very pleased at least to see that the efficacy of the treatment was meeting what we felt it was clinically significant. But not only that, if you can see the light blue part, that is actually very good responses. Those are actually 90% decrease in IgM levels. And we see that in 63% of the first 7 patients that we treated. So this is actually a surprise to us, a good surprise to us, because we didn't know, we were hoping we'd see a response, but we didn't know we were going to see such deep responses with this type of treatment, right? And the beauty about this is we have not seen IgM flares so far, so we have learned that there's no IgM flares so far. Some patients have probably here have been experiencing a lot of reactions to the infusion with rituximab. We have not seen infusion reactions to the 1-hour infusion with this agent. Right, so no infusion reactions, no IgM flares so far. So really a very different agent, and we didn't know that, right? So going in, we didn't know that. But now that we have seen 14, 15 patients on treatment, we know that. So we learned that now, and that's something that we can share, with you at this time. The second study that we are running as part of the network is this WMNet2, is actually the ZEBRA study. This study is a little bit different. This study is specifically for patients who have never been treated. This is for first treatment. And the principal investigator for this study is Andy Brannigan. He's our colleague from the Massachusetts General Hospital. And we have 2 collaborators at this time, Dr. Larry Anderson from UT Southwestern in Dallas, and Jeffrey Mattis, who was also here at the panel from the Colorado Blood Cancer Institute. This study is already active and enrolling. This study actually opened in January. And we already have, at the time of submission, there were 15 out of 55. As of today, we are actually 17 out of 55. So in the last couple of weeks, we actually had 2 more patients enrolling in this study. So this study, as you can understand, is going to be a little bit different than the study that I just mentioned earlier in terms of the design of the study. And the screening is very similar, right? We do the screening, the patient sign consent, all that doesn't really change. That's pretty standard. The treatment is a little bit different. So in this case, we are using bendamustine and rituximab, 4 cycles. We're not doing the 6 cycles that is considered standard. We're doing 4 because we're using the combination of this third agent called zanubrutinib, which is, probably some of you are familiar with this type of BTK inhibitor. So we made a proviso in patients who are older than 60 or 65 or 70, I think, to actually decrease the dose of bendamustine to make it more palatable in terms of side effects. And the patients will also, in addition to be getting the chemotherapy for the first 4 months, they will be also on zanubrutinib for about 15 months. So this is an interesting study for a number of reasons. Number one, it's a triplet, meaning we're using 3 agents, and this is something that has not been tried before in the United States. There's a study in Canada that maybe some of you are familiar with the BROM study, in which they did something very similar, bendamustine rituximab, 6 cycles instead of 4, and then 1 year of acalabrutinib, which is a different BTK inhibitor. So this is kind of mimicking a little bit of that experience, making some tweaks to maybe hopefully causing less toxicity and hopefully inducing a good response as well. So the end of treatment on this study, that is not until month 15. So you have to complete your 15 months of zanubrutinib taken every day, and then the end of treatment visit will happen, labs, CAT scans, bone marrow biopsies, and then patients will continue on monitoring for 4 additional years, and then patients will be out of study at that moment. So in theory, this study for one patient will be 5.5 years. The prior study was 4.5 years. This is a 5.5-year study, right? So it's just a little bit different. But at the end, the idea of running this study is what we call VGPR. So the objective of the study is a little bit different than the objective of the prior study, because these are previously untreated patients. So we are really hoping to induce a deep response. And I think at this time, our goal was 50% very good partial response or more. So that's the objective of the study. Something that I mentioned earlier is how do we come up with these numbers, right? Oh, we need 50 patients for this study. We need 24 for this study. We need 40 for this study. So how do we come up with these numbers? Sounds really arbitrary. Semi-arbitrary, but not completely arbitrary. So the way that we come up with these numbers is we select what outcome we want, in this case, very good response, and we want to see a percentage we want to be superior to, right? So we say we want to obtain a 50% VGPR. Most patients with getting either bendamustine rituximab or zanubrutinib alone will be at 30% VGPR. So we want to make sure that 30% is the lowest, 50% is the highest. How many people do we need to show that, right? And that's how the number is estimated. So all these are statistical, mathematical calculations that we have to make based on our prior experiences. So it's not just random numbers to say, I'm going to use 100, I'm going to use 50. There's a reason of the number of patients based on what we are expecting to obtain or based on what we have seen, right? And this is essentially how we inform the sample size that we need for this type of trials. The study number 3 is the study on epcoritamab. Epcoritamab is another immunotherapy. Epcoritamab is already approved in the United States to treat patients with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, which is an aggressive lymphoma, and also follicular lymphoma, which is another indolent lymphoma similar to Waldenstrom's. And epcoritamab is already approved. It's a bispecific antibody. So how bispecific antibody works is different than the naked antibodies like rituximab or the ADCs like loncastuximab. Bispecific antibodies actually are antibodies like rituximab much, but actually has 2 arms. One arm is for the cancer cell, in this case CD20. So it's targeting the same target that rituximab does, but it has another arm that actually is supposed to target the anti-cancer cell. In this case, the T cells. The T cells are the anti-cancer cells. So once the antibody gets infused, one arm catches the cancer cell, the other arm catches the anti-cancer cell and brings them together. So just the fact that they are in close proximity actually activates the immune system to kill the cancer cells with more efficacy. So the antibody itself has some activity, but they actually revs up the immune system, and that's why it's called immunotherapy, right? So this is another very cool mechanism of action. It's new. This is actually the first study with this agent in Waldenstrom's in the world. There's another study that is going to be open with a very similar agent in Europe, but that's going to be opening a little bit later this year. So this study is actively open now, and we're going to be enrolling our first patients within the next few weeks. The principal investigator for this study is Dr. Gottfried van Keudel. He's also part of the network. You've probably seen him around. And for this, we are collaborating with UT Southwestern in Dallas, Dr. Anderson, and Dr. Chris Dittus, our member of the University of North Carolina. This study has already approved by Dana-Farber, and the IRB approved, and has been recently activated in the last week or so. So we're expecting drug delivery into our pharmacy as soon as next week. Hopefully we're starting enrolling patients at that moment, and we'll let you know how that goes in the next meeting. We're very excited about all these treatments. We believe these are the treatments that will lead the way to open up complete new area of research for patients with Waldenstrom's. And I think that's one of the most important aspects of the network is doing, is actually trying these new agents, these new combinations that have not been tried previously in Waldenstrom's. Again, we do the screening, labs, CAT scans, bone marrow. That's the standard. Once the patient is considered to be a good candidate for the study, then we begin treatment. In this treatment, it's a little bit different. These treatments epcoritamab is given as subcutaneous injections, so injections under the skin. And it's given weekly for the first 3 cycles, so that's about 12 shots. And then every other week for about 6 more cycles, and then monthly for about 3 or more cycles, and at the end you complete 12 cycles, 12 months of treatment as a year of therapy, and then you stop treatment. So it's very, very frequently injections. They spaced out a little bit more, they spaced out a little bit more at the end, and then it comes the end of treatment, and then we follow a 4-year follow-up after that. So this is a 5-year study, right? So the duration of the studies are just a little bit different depending on how the design is. And again, for this study, we're actually aiming, based on the loncastuximab data, we're actually aiming for very good responses on these patients. And we're doing, I think, 40% as the max or higher versus a 10% or less. And that difference, we should be able to show that difference with 24, 26 patients. And that's what we're aiming to enroll on this study. And those are the ones that are actively open. We actually have a couple of trials that are coming up. And one of them is the combination. We're trying to do another triplet, but this is a triplet without chemotherapy. This is a non-chemo triplet. And this is pirtobrutinib, venetoclax, and rituximab. I haven't mentioned this yet because it's not a network trial, but we are conducting a clinical trial with pirtobrutinib and venetoclax. These are a BTK inhibitor and a BCL2 inhibitor for 2 years. This is finite and has been so effective so far. We're almost done enrolling with that study, that we think that we add rituximab, a triplet, in patients previously untreated. I think we might be able to get nice deep responses. So the principal investigators for that study are Dr. Leah Palomba, who unfortunately is not here, and Gottfried. Between the two of them have been planning all this with the help of the network. And obviously, Dana-Farber and other centers will be participating on this study as well. This is after Zebra. Once we complete Zebra, this is going to be our next frontline study. In the other study in previously untreated, so we'll complete the loncastuximab, then EPCO, then we'll get into this ABV338, which is an antibody very similar to the loncastuximab, but very similar to epcoritamab, but instead of targeting CD20, it's targeting BCMA. BCMA is another marker that is almost exclusively present in plasma cells and lymphoplasmacytic cells like Waldenstrom's. And the principal investigator for that study is going to be Dr. Prashant Kapoor from the Mayo Clinic, and he's actively looking for partners to collaborate on this study. So this is the second generation of clinical trials that we will be running, as a network platform. The second big program is the database. We need urgently a clinical database for patients with Waldenstrom's in the United States. We have a lot of different databases, but they all have different roles. I know you're familiar with the epidemiological database like SEER or the National Cancer Database, NCDB. Those are good databases, but they don't have the granularity of understanding, what the IgM was, what type of treatment patients got, when did the patients get the response, how long did it take for the response to last. I mean, these data are so granular that cannot be collected at the registry level. So we need to create this specific Waldenstrom's registry. And the leads for this is Dr. Prashant Kapoor from Mayo, Dr. Yazid Sawala from the Ohio State, and Dr. Georgios Pongas from the University of Miami. And the three of them presented yesterday the final structure of the database. It took a while to get all the data points that we want, and we will start collecting data over the last 10 years. We're going to do a 10-year diagnostic study retrospective along all the centers of the network in the United States to understand really, how are we treating patients with Waldenstrom's, right? I would be surprised, for example, if there's only 2 frontline treatments. I think it's going to be probably like 25 different frontline treatments, and we need to understand how we treat those patients, so to provide this diagnosis and then be able to provide, obviously, more guidance and training and teaching, not only to the patients like yourselves, but also to the practitioners, right? Through this creation, we will understand treatment patterns, throughout the years, how the outcomes of patients are changing or not, depending on what we're treating. And obviously, some clinical questions will not be answered by clinical trials, and we need to have these pre-existing data to be able to answer those questions. One of the questions is, for example, what happens if I start with chemo and then I do a BTK inhibitor versus if I start with BTK inhibitor and I do chemo later? Is there any difference? We don't know that. So no company is going to pay for a study like that. So we will need to answer that question, for example, with this type of efforts. So just for you to understand how we complement the trial perspective with the database. And the last sub-project is the biorepository. Biobanking is something really important to understand the science, right? The idea of the network is not only to treat patients in clinical trials, but they have to be informing science and informed by science. So collecting data, collecting samples is actually very important. So in patients in clinical trials, they will have their blood and their marrows collected. They will actually go into a biorepository that will be located physically at the Dana-Farber and maintained by one of our technicians for future investigations, right? And the IWMF provides a series of grants for patients, for practitioners, investigators who want to do research in samples from patients in clinical trials. So I think that's going to be a really important collaboration in that setting. So in that way, not only we will know that a medication works in a disease, but we know how it works or why it works, right? Just by going deeper into the science of this. And the lead for this is going to be Dr. Shiva Thomas at MD Anderson, and I'll be helping out with this creation of this biorepository as well. It goes without saying that takes a little bit of work, to get all the documentation ready, to share data, to share materials between different centers. So that's where the network helps to make all these efforts together. Obviously, none of this will be possible without the strategic partnership with the foundation, who have been nice enough to, feel that this is a good idea, and we'll be working. We have been working with them. They have provided the funds for this study, and also a number of other funds from different families and private patients who feel that this is also a good idea. If you feel that this is something that you might be interested in supporting, please feel free to talk to the foundation or send me an email, and I'll be happy to make sure that their resources go to the right place. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. Thanks. And then I will bring Leah, so she can just talk to you a little bit more about how we navigate, clinical trial participation. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Castillo, and thank you to IWMF for inviting me here today to represent the Leukemia Lymphoma Society and to tell you about one of our amazing free supports. All right. So I'm very grateful for the amount of times that our service has been mentioned during these amazing talks during the past couple of days. And I know it's probably clear to everyone in the audience that clearly clinical trials and research are the key step in advancing cancer treatment. But the problem is that participation in cancer clinical trials in the United States is low. There are many reasons for that. And I always tell people, wanting to enroll into a clinical trial or being curious about it and actually enrolling is not a straight path. There are so many bumps in the road. And I think at LLS, we understand how complicated that process is. And so the Clinical Trial Support Center was actually developed as a resource that would help patients or their families or even their healthcare providers identify potential clinical trials, overcome those barriers to enrollment, and support them through that entire process. And I like to say that it's about building a patchwork quilt of resources to get someone into a clinical trial. even if that clinical trial happens to be at your site of care, there are lots of challenges that come about it. So if you've ever Googled clinical trials, and I'm guessing many of you have, there are clinical trial matching programs that will generate a list of trials that may not actually take into account all of your unique characteristics. So after the next few minutes, I hope that it becomes clear to you that what we're doing is unique to help you get the care that you need. So the LLS Clinical Trial Support Center, or CTSC, so I'm adding one more acronym to your glossary this weekend here, is a team of 12 nurse navigators with expertise in both pediatric and adult blood cancer. And our name, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, is a bit of a misnomer. We are looking to help all blood cancer patients, myeloma, MPNs, Waldenstrom, of course. So we are here to help everybody. And, it's about understanding exactly who the patient is at that moment. So there's really 3 ways that people find us, and I'll give you more details about that at the end. But no matter how someone finds my department, they are going to work with a designated nurse navigator throughout the duration of that relationship. Now, that may just be a couple of weeks, but most likely it's many months, if not years. I've been here for almost 8 years now, and I have patients that I still check in with going on 5 to 6 years. So it's a very unique relationship that's formed. But right at the onset, it's about that nurse navigator really getting to understand exactly who that patient is. So, a comprehensive assessment, of course, of past medical history, their diagnosis and treatment history, markers and mutations as example, but also an educational assessment. Okay, so what is the patient's understanding of their available treatment options, including clinical trials? And there's always some amount of education that we can offer at that point as well. But what are their goals of care? What are their preferences for treatment? And then doing a psychosocial assessment to understand what supports does someone have or do they not have that would make participating in a trial that will likely take you away from home frequently or for an extended period of time possible. So it's really about understanding that whole situation. And that conversation may not be with the actual patient, it might be with their caregiver. But still, there will be a designated nurse navigator that will be there. You will have her phone number and email to phone and call and email at all hours of the night, which is really unique. So what happens when we know all this information? Well, then it's about doing that deep dive into the clinical trials. And, this is part of our process that has certainly evolved the most in the past probably 7 years or so. We have been able to build a database with the support of partners and an outside vendor that sits on top of clinicaltrials.gov. So any clinical trial with an NCT number, including the WMNet trials that Dr. Castillo described, are in our database. But if you've ever kind of perused clinicaltrials.gov, it's extremely difficult to understand. It's really difficult for study teams and sponsors to keep that information up to date. And so it's difficult. It was actually never intended to be a clinical trial search engine. But we want that because we want to know as these new trials open. But the beautiful thing that we have the ability to do is augment, override, edit that information as we learn more about clinical trials. So you've heard even here, there are more sites opening. Getting that listed on clinicaltrials.gov might take a while, but I could update that information in my system in a matter of seconds, and that way we're giving patients and their families and their healthcare team the most up-to-date information possible. So what we don't do is give a 20-page printout of clinical trials. We go through each one of them, read all of those inclusion-exclusion criteria, take into account all those unique patient characteristics that we've already learned to come up with a list of potential options. Something else that we're not doing is saying this is the trial that you should enroll into. What we want to do is give patients vetted information in a language that's easy to understand that they can then take back to their provider or to their second opinion for that medical expertise. And that's called shared decision-making. That's incredibly important, and we encourage those conversations to happen, and the nurse navigator is there for whatever the next step might be. So maybe it's pursuing one specific clinical trial, or maybe it's looking at 2 to see which has the quickest opening. Whatever it might be, the nurse navigator is there. The other thing that's happening in the background is, I told you the clinicaltrials.gov information is not always that helpful or easy to understand. So the nurses are doing a tremendous amount of outreach to specific sites, to specific study teams to learn more about a patient's eligibility or what's the process for a new patient appointment, asking questions about insurance, what's the wait list, are there resources for the patient and the caregiver to travel, all of that stuff. So it's really time-intensive work, but what we have found is this relationship with the nurse navigator really helps. So I love to share this picture because it is a good pictorial of how difficult it might be sometimes to find a clinical trial for a patient. So if you look at the top of this filter, and imagine that all of those pills are all the clinical trials available for Waldenstrom. But then you start to factor in all of these unique patient characteristics. When you get to the bottom of that funnel, there may be only a few options. So sometimes it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, and we're like little detectives trying to figure out what someone might be eligible for. But it's valuable work. So that being said, the goal is not to enroll every single one of our patients into a clinical trial. There are lots of reasons why a clinical trial may not be the next best step for somebody. But what we pride ourselves in doing is increasing the opportunities for participation by increasing awareness of what clinical trials truly are, and supporting patients through whatever that treatment decision process is going to be, because there are bumps in the road to no matter what you're trying to go forward with, whether it's clinical trials or standard of care as examples. It's about working in collaboration with your healthcare team. Now, a lot of patients find us because they're savvy self-advocates, and I'm looking at a bunch of you in the audience today. But we're going to be able to give you the tools to go back and have that conversation with your team about the possibility of clinical trials or the possibility of seeking a second opinion by a specialist. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is really educate and empower patients in being active participants in their treatment decisions. So here's a quick glimpse of my team. I'm super proud of them. They really have just an overwhelming amount of expertise in the care of hematology and oncology. I have 3 pediatric nurse practitioners on the team. I have an adult nurse practitioner. I have nurses who have spent their entire career in transplant and cellular therapy. I have research nurses. The takeaway is we are ready to meet the needs of any patient. We have Spanish-speaking nurses as well. So we are here to help anybody in any way that we can. So you don't have to just take my word for it. I do have some data to back this up. So if we look at our past fiscal year, we were a team of 12, and we assisted just over 1,100 patients and families. You can see, I'm going to go back to, thank you. Of the patients who were eligible, our enrollment rate was 20%. So in my first few minutes, I told you, clinical trial participation in the US is low. There's varying metrics in the literature, but probably 5 to 8% of adults participate in cancer clinical treatment trials in the US. So we're certainly above that benchmark, which is fantastic, but I see lots of way for us to grow. But the data that I love to share is that for us to have helped someone enroll into a clinical trial, it took on average 22 interactions by one of my nurse navigators on behalf of a patient to achieve enrollment. Those interactions are the phone calls and emails that I mentioned, learning more about the eligibility criteria, insurance questions, process for new patient appointment, trying to find financial resources. And so I look at that number as 22 cracks in a road that unfortunately a lot of patients might fall through if they tried to do this process on their own. So that really speaks to, the benefit of having that nurse navigator at your fingertips. The reasons that patients did not enroll, there's not a lot of surprising information here, very consistent with the literature. A proportion of patients aren't indicated for a change in treatment at the time, but they may be coming to us for a what-if search. Like, what's my plan B in the event that plan A no longer works? There are insurance constraints. Financial implications of healthcare and participating in clinical trials are significant. So no surprise there. And then geography. Unfortunately, the majority of Americans don't live near the places where the research is happening currently. Over the past couple of years, we started to collect some new data. This is data right during that initial conversation that I mentioned that signals what those potential barriers might be so that the nurse can preemptively try to circumvent some of those barriers and gather the appropriate resources right from the beginning. I think this data will be very fruitful down the road because it will help us as an organization really target some of our interventions to help decrease and eliminate these barriers. This is a really busy slide, but I just wanted to share that last year we were able to do a formal evaluation of our patients and our caregivers. And the takeaway here is that the information that patients received from their nurse navigator was helpful. It was easy to understand. The nurse was kind and was there for them in every way. And so I just want to share that. Another busy slide, but this is for the providers in the room. I really want us to be seen as an extension of the healthcare team. We are not looking to take anyone's patient away from them. But what we do know is that to do the research on what clinical trial options may be available is time intensive, particularly if you don't have clinical trials within your own site of care. So we want to be able to be an extension of your team, to offset that workload, give you the information that you need to be able to have that shared decision-making conversation with your patient, and then we can help you every step of the way. Some of this timeline here just shows a really unique relationship that we have formed with the VA health system, which is, a wonderful population, also an underserved population. And so we have really been able to create lots of offshoots of our initial work, which was just a small referral pilot with the Durham VA. And that's really blossomed into some really incredible things. And one is a training module or training program to help fellows, physicians, talk about clinical trials with patients. Clinical trial discussions are very nuanced. They can also be very time intensive. There are lots of myths and misconceptions about clinical trials, which adds to the complexity of the process. And it's not something that is, heavily focused on in medical training. And so we've developed this project. It's an hour of didactic education based on a theoretical framework, but then it's an hour of role play with actual patient volunteers. And it's been amazing. And we've piloted to about 7 sites. We're looking to branch out to more sites in this next year, and hoping to really scale this on a much bigger level, because the feedback I hope to be able to share with you maybe next year, has been really overwhelming, that providers feel more comfortable starting these conversations with patients and being able to offer that as a potential treatment option at every stage of treatment, whether it's diagnosis or relapse and whatnot. So just a quick patient story here to show you what we've actually done in action here. We had a patient who was in his late 60s, diagnosed with WM back in 2023, and had been on watch and wait therapy until he started to develop anemia and neuropathy. Under the recommendation of his primary hematologist and a second opinion with my co-partner here, the recommendation was to start zanubrutinib. But the patient did his due diligence and was a self-advocate, and he did some internet research, and he found us. And what he really stated during that initial conversation with his nurse was, I just want to make sure I'm getting the best care possible. And I look at that as the spirit of leaving no stone left unturned, making sure that you're comfortable with your decision. So I have some busy slides here to show you, but I know it's difficult probably to see this, but what I've pulled out of this actual trial search that we provided to the patient was just to show that no 2 trial searches are ever the same that we give to patients. The information we give describing a clinical trial is based on what the educational preferences are of the patient. So some patients want data. They want to know what the preclinical data was if we can find it. They want to understand everything there is to know about the mechanism of action. For some patients, less is more, and that's totally fine. This was a patient who really wanted a thorough understanding of what the components were to the trial. But I'll just call your attention to the highlighted area there. That shows you the type of unique personalized outreach that the nurses are doing on behalf of patients, to reach out to that PI, that study site, to make sure that in fact they were taking new patients, so that we're giving people actual potential treatment options. We also have the beauty of incorporating whatever educational supports a patient might need. So here is just an example with the red highlight here. These are the indications for active treatment, which was going to be very helpful for that patient as he took that next step in his journey. And then this last slide here is, about, we're very fortunate within the Leukemia Lymphoma Society to have lots of resources that we can wrap our patients around, whether it's financial assistance programs, whether it's a nutrition consult with Ellie and her team, whether it might be part of our First Connection program, which is a peer-to-peer support program, support groups in their local area, whatever it might be. We're really fortunate to be able to build that patchwork quilt of resources for patients. So ultimately for this patient, the recommendation continued to be moving forward with zanubrutinib rather than a clinical trial. And I think that just shows you that this is still, in my estimation, a success. We were able to help this patient move forward confidently with standard of care. And what you'll see here in these thank you notes and the correspondence with Elise, the nurse, is that she, again, was able to wrap him into other resources that we had available at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society as well. So the peer-to-peer program and nutrition as examples. So I like this quote from Julie. It really just talks about how, we're here to help in any way possible. We want to see the patient in their entirety and their family and really help support them in every way possible. So if you're interested in learning more, there are several ways you can reach out to us. We have the amazing Information Resource Center at LLS, which is our 1-800 number. That group is primarily master's prepared social workers, and they are ready to meet the needs of any patient as well. If during that conversation, a patient or a family is interested in learning more about clinical trials, they'll be referred to us. We do have an online referral form, but if you take anything away from me, just email me. I'm going to put my cards out there as well, but ctsc@lls.org. I man that inbox. I will work with you creatively to help you access whatever care you might need and get the resources you need to be able to do so confidently. So that's it.
All right. Oof. I scared myself. All right. Okay, so yeah, I think we have time for a few questions. Please, over there. She's coming.
Anybody over here?
Thank you, Sharon.
You too.
Right there. Right there.
Dr. Castillo, my question relates to clinical trials and geography. We live in Seattle, where Fred Hutch is located. Let's assume that a clinical trial has been approved and is run, say, by Dana-Farber out of Boston. Is there a way to participate in that trial by going to the Hutch for treatment as opposed to getting on an airplane once a month and flying back to Boston?
Yeah. So, well, that's what the network is trying to kind of address up to some degree. If the study is only being run at Dana-Farber, then the participant needs to go to the center where the clinical trial is being run. The trial cannot be run in a different center. But if you have a center closer to you that is running that same study, then you can go to that center, right? So when you go to the clinic, and I think Leah can speak a little bit more to that, when you say, I think I'm interested in this study specifically, typically there's a list of sites that actually have that study open. And then that, then you can choose the site that is, geographically a bit closer to you. One of the big challenges, I think, for the network specifically is that the number of sites that open a trial are limited by the administrative capabilities of the center that have the study open. For example, if I open a study at Dana-Farber allows 5 additional sites in addition to Dana-Farber, and that's the max. So there's going to be no more than 6 sites, which is different than in Europe. For example, in Europe, you can open a study in 20 sites at the same time, right? Because they have a different operating mechanism. There's a little bit more red tape in the United States in that specific setting. So, I agree that the ideal scenario will be that if one opens a study in one site, the other 20 sites, will be open as well. But I think as it stands today, that is not possible. We're trying to come up with some mechanisms to see if we can maybe open, sites, many sites at the same time. But as of today, that is not the way this is going to go.
Hello? Okay. I'll just add to that, in the instances where a clinical trial is far away, that's when it's important to reach out to an advocacy organization, as an example, to see what types of resources there might be available. And sometimes the study sponsor has resources to help patients travel great distances to participate as well. But something else that is very unique about LLS is that we have something called the Office of Public Policy, which is trying to make clinical trials more accessible to people behind the scenes. working with legislation, bills, working with the FDA, other entities to help make clinical trials easier to get to. And I think part of us being able to do that is helping patients access components of that care closer to home. And so that's something that, LLS is advocating for. Maybe you can get some of the blood work and whatnot done at your community site in between visits. But there's a lot of red tape with that as well. So that's why the Office of Public Policy is really working hard on that to make it more accessible to everyone.
Is this on? Yes. Thank you. This is for Dr. Castillo. A member of my support group just started a trial at Wilmot Cancer Center in Rochester, New York, with the University of Rochester. She called it ABBV 101. Are you familiar with it? Do you have any information that I could take back?
Well, I'm not familiar with the agent itself. Based on what it says, it looks like the manufacturer is Abbey, the company, and so I think a quick Google ABB 101 will tell you what type of agent is it. Yeah, that is not one of the studies that I'm familiar with at this time. Yeah, but it might sounds to me that it's like a bispecific antibody or some type of antibody of that nature. That's what it sounds to me.
If she wants to reach out to me, we can help provide some education about that.
Yeah, time for one more question.
Okay. If we have participated in previous clinical trials at any of these centers and have given permission for our to be collected and saved, is that all going to be available to you from all these centers where we've been signing these consent forms for decades?
So if you participate in a clinical trial at a specific center, the data typically is collected and kept at that center. If there is a specific collaborative effort in which some of the data is requested to be shared, that could be done in that setting if you consented in the first place to do that and the data is de-identified, meaning there is no way that the new center could know who you are as a person. Typically, they get access to your blood samples or your marrow samples or lymph node samples or DNA, but and maybe some clinical data, but not precisely something that will identify you personally.
Okay. Actually, back here. Sorry, there's a couple questions from folks online, and they're kind of geographically related, so I'll pose them to Dr. Castillo. One is, are there any sites centrally in the U.S. that are part of going to be part of WMNet? And also, how about Canada in that regard?
Yeah, so as it stands today, none of the centers in the United States who are sponsoring a specific clinical trial will be able to extend that trial into Canada. There is, it's a different country. So just in case, it's a different country, and there's a specific legislature blockades that allow this participation. What can be done, and this is the way we're thinking of moving in terms of these consortia, is maybe generate a protocol that will be run at two separate sites at the same time, each of them independently, from the regulatory perspective, and then combine the data at the end, as long as all the data are collected exactly at the same time with exactly the same methodology. So that is a way to go, but it's not going to be possible for Dana-Farber or Mayo or Sloan, for example, to sponsor a study across borders. So that is not feasible. And then the first question was, regionally speaking, where?
In the central part of the United States.
Well, what I showed in the map is what we have so far, the different sites. And again, if you're interested, talk to your oncologist locally and see if they're more willing to combine. I think in the central part, I think it's more Mayo, Rochester is there. I think Denver, Colorado, there's another site. I think Utah is another site too. I don't know. So that's what I see so far.
Thank you. That's about all we have time for, but I just want to thank Dr. Castillo. This is really exciting times that we have a new mechanism for clinical trials for patients across the United States, and hopefully it'll lead to more trials in other locations, but this is significantly more access than we've had before, so I encourage people to take advantage of it. And I just want to say also regarding the LLS and Leah Szumita, I tested the process out myself a few months ago, and the staff was amazing. I got a response within 1 or 2 days. Unfortunately, I didn't qualify for anything. I didn't think I would, but I thought I'd test it out. And they followed up with an email. They followed up with a phone call. They called me a week later just to see if I needed anything else. So I can't say enough about how helpful they are. So
Thank you for
to
sharing.
both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.